to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack some absolutely brilliant insights from management legend Peter Drucker. We are skipping the usual corporate jargon today and jumping straight into a fundamental question about your daily operations. It's actually a question that most managers think they have totally nailed, but as you'll see, they usually get it completely wrong. So I want you to pose this question directly to yourself right now. What does your company do? Seriously, take a second. Let your instinctive answer pop into your head. If you were to ask a typical entrepreneur or manager this exact question, they almost always fire back with the exact same response. Got your answer ready? I bet it was something like, we make money, right? Or maybe, we are an organization designed to create a profit. Well, it's the most common answer given by business owners and even economists. But here's the kicker. Peter Drucker considered this universally accepted answer not just wrong, but entirely irrelevant. Now, don't get me wrong. Drucker isn't saying profit doesn't matter. Profit is absolutely crucial, for sure, but it's not the actual explanation or the cause or the rationale for your business decisions. Okay, let's dive into this because we really need to flip the traditional business mindset on its head. The common illusion is treating profit as the ultimate purpose or goal, but Drucker's reality is entirely different. He says profit is simply a thermometer. It's just a test of validity. Think about it this way. A thermometer measures whether or not you have a fever, right? It tells you if you're healthy. But the thermometer is definitely not the reason you are healthy. Profit is exactly the same thing. It's the thermometer of your business. It tells you if you're doing things right, but it's merely a limiting factor, not the actual reason your business exists. So if profit isn't the purpose, what is? Well, Drucker is completely unambiguous about this core truth. The actual purpose of any company cannot exist within the walls of the business itself. It must lie in society. It exists entirely outside the company. He says there's literally only one valid definition of business purpose, and that is to create a customer. Everything else is secondary to that single driving goal. Now, what's really fascinating here is how this frames the creation of markets. Markets aren't just created by nature or some abstract economic forces. No, they are created by people in business. Think about it. Nobody knew they desperately wanted a photocopier or computer until business action made those products available and literally created the customers for them. It's the action of the business that actively shapes and builds the market, not the other way around. So the absolutely crucial point is this. Because business action creates the customer, it's ultimately the customer who determines what your company actually is. Your company isn't defined by its name on the building. It's not defined by its corporate statute, and it's certainly not defined by what you think you're selling. It is defined exclusively by the customer and what they consider to be valuable. And because the customer alone defines value, Drucker argues that a company only has two fundamental functions, just two, marketing and innovation. That is the whole shebang. Absolutely everything else happening in your business, manufacturing, HR, accounting, logistics, is just an expense. Only marketing and innovation actually produce results and create that customer. But we need to be incredibly careful here because marketing is not the same as selling. In fact, actually, scratch that. They are basically opposites. Selling pushes a product. It starts with the question, what do we want to sell? Marketing, on the other hand, starts from the outside in. It starts with, what does the customer want to buy? The ultimate goal of marketing isn't just to push a product out the door. The goal is to understand the customer so perfectly that the product fits them like a glove and just sells itself, rendering the whole act of selling completely superfluous. The Cadillac Epiphany, a shift in perspective that saved a brand. To really cement this idea of knowing what the customer is buying, let's look at a wild historical example from the 1930s. Cadillac was struggling, big time. The people inside the company operated under a very logical but ultimately fatal assumption. If you ask them what they did, they'd say, we manufacture cars. Therefore, they wrongly assumed they were competing with Chevrolet and Ford for transportation dollars. But then a guy named Nicholas Dreystadt takes over Cadillac during the Great Depression, and he looks at the customer instead of the factory floor. He realized that Cadillac doesn't actually compete with Ford. He delivered this absolute bombshell of a realization. Cadillac competes with diamonds and mink coats. That single realization completely transformed the brand. Dreystadt understood that his wealthy customers during the Depression weren't buying a machine just to get them from point A to point B. I mean, if they just wanted transportation, a Ford would do just fine. They were buying something entirely different. And this brilliantly illustrates the core of Drucker's philosophy. Customers never, ever just buy a physical product. They buy what the product actually does for them. You might think you're selling the physical product of transportation,
But the true value the customer is purchasing is prestige, status, and luxury. By understanding that they were selling prestige right alongside diamonds and mink coats, Cadillac altered their entire marketing and innovation strategy, and it totally saved the brand from collapse.
This builds perfectly into the second core function, innovation. Drucker is very clear that innovation is not just about inventing some crazy new piece of technology. It's fundamentally an economic concept. It's about finding new value for the customer. Like, for example, selling a refrigerator to an Eskimo. That isn't a technological invention. It's the exact same old fridge. But selling it to them not to keep food cold, but simply to keep their food from freezing solid in the harsh Arctic air, now that is pure economic innovation. It's redefining the value of the product for a very specific customer. So what happens when a company fails to grasp all these concepts? Well, Drucker warns that the fact that the purpose and mission of a business are so rarely given adequate thought is perhaps the single most important cause of business failure. Why? Because inside your company, people at all levels are making decisions every single day. If top management hasn't explicitly defined the true purpose, like exactly who the customer is and what they value, then every team member is going to rely on their own vague, conflicting theories. You'll end up with teams rowing in completely different directions, literally pulling the company apart, without even realizing they're doing it. 3 essential questions, aligning your team with Drucker's method. To stop your team from rowing in different directions, you need total alignment, and Drucker provides a highly actionable framework for this. These are questions you should immediately bring to your very next team meeting. Step 1, who is our customer? And remember, this isn't just one broad group. Almost every company has at least 2 types of customers they need to explicitly identify. Step 2, what do they actually buy? Remember the Cadillac story? Are they buying a car, or are they buying a status symbol? And step 3, what does the customer consider to be value? Drucker noted from decades of consulting that successful companies are almost always the ones that purposefully ask and thoughtfully answer these exact 3 questions, while failing companies almost never do. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to turn the mirror directly back onto you and your business. Forget about the profit margins and the complex spreadsheets for just a moment. If your sole purpose is to create a customer, you have to answer this profound question. What does your customer actually consider value? Discuss it with your team, get to the bottom of it. The answer might just change the entire trajectory of your business. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.